You know, funny enough, I've never really been too into Invincible, but after watching it, because now I have to make this video, thanks to the commission of this legend right here, you can thank him down below in the comments, now I had to watch this series, and honestly, it was kind of a banger, I won't lie, but truth be told, I've only seen 5 episodes to the point where I'm recording this video, because, bro, making this video is already going to take me at least 2 days, and I didn't need another day spent binging Invincible, which, granted, probably would have been fun, but I gotta get this video out. That said, ladies and gentlemen, today you're going to be seeing Deku have powers such as flight, super strength, and speed, all the usual, superhero comic stuff. This is essentially just what if Deku was Superman, if I'm being honest, minus a couple cool powers, but I can confidently still say that I had an absolute blast recording this. So if you guys go on to enjoy the video, leave a like, do all that usual YouTube stuff, and turn on your post notifications, and enjoy. We begin our story off in the perspective of Omni-Man on the planet Wolfram, being told that he needs to go to Earth and essentially conquer the planet, or whatever it is that Viltrumites do. To be honest, I'm still not really too sure why that happens, because I'm like on episode 6 at this point, so yeah, the intro kind of stands true. Point is, for this specific video, there's going to be 2 changes. Obviously, Deku didn't actually have to be the son of Omni-Man for this specific video, but I wanted to have that be the case so that his powers were different than a quirk and they weren't too limiting. Obviously, I could have just given him a quirk, given him speed, flight, and super strength, and that would have been just fine, but there's just so many cool plot point things that I feel like I could have done with Omni-Man in the story that I just was not missing out on. And one of those things would be that huge fight that Mark and Omni-Man end up having in the end of the story, and that was just too much for me to pass out. So we're here, and Izuku in this specific timeline, like I said, is going to be a Viltrumite and is also going to be the son of Omni-Man. But there's going to be a couple more changes that I'm going to be implementing, but they're going to be coming throughout the story. Obviously, Izuku having a father like Omni-Man is heavily going to be changing his personality and the way that he grows up and everything else, yada, yada, yada. But the biggest thing in this story that's actually going to be changing, that's not necessarily, well, technically it is going to be affecting Deku's life. In fact, every aspect of it, but Deku's father is going to be the #1 hero of not Japan, not America, the world. Every single place on the planet, Omni-Man is the greatest hero because he could be anywhere at once, and whenever a large threat would pretty much end up threatening the world, Omni-Man would be there to stop it, destroying it at all costs. Oh, but one more thing that I want to change to the story is that Omni-Man in this timeline is not going to be killing, at least not when people can see it. You get what I mean? So he's not going to be killing people out in the public, but he still is going to be killing whenever it's stuff that, normal people aren't going to be able to actually see. That said, in this specific timeline, Deku's still gonna be quirkless or powerless, technically, because that's really what he is, until about 2 to 1 month before he would have met All Might in the original timeline. This is going to be having massive implications because Izuku being the son of the #1 hero in the world isn't exactly going to be the craziest thing in the world. Everyone in Deku's school is going to know about it, and everyone in the media is going to be well aware of the fact that his son is Izuku Midoriya. Ever since Izuku learned how to walk and talk, he would have the media on him like a parasite, literally. This dude is the Bronny James of this world. And in case you don't watch basketball, he's basically the son of an NBA legend, all right? So a lot of people were expecting big things of him, and now that he's older, he's not exactly living up to those things, so people criticize him. That's what's going to be happening here. And this is heavily going to affect Izuku growing up, because once Izuku reaches the age of 4, which is technically the age that most people actually get their quirks, people would be expecting great things of him. And once Bakugo would awaken his quirk, he would pretty much gloat and show it off, and everyone's telling him that he's the best. But in that moment, he would actually feel a bit insecure, knowing that the son of the #1 hero in the world is there. And if he gets something similar to what his father has in terms of a quirk, then he's no longer going to be the strongest in the classroom, the coolest, or any of those things. And so when Deku actually would turn out to be quirkless after going to visit the quirk doctor, Bakugo would almost feel so much joy. But interestingly enough, he would actually also feel mad at Izuku because of the fact that he's the literal son of Omni-Man and he's such a useless Deku, in his own words. That said, Deku's childhood is going to be being flipped on its head, and he's not going to be living the same exact life that he had in the original. In this timeline, Bakugo is going to be the only person to outright say what they're kind of feeling, that Deku is, well, a disappointment. He would bully Deku throughout most of his life, and it's not like he's gonna do anything crazy or beat him up or anything. Granted, he would do this a couple of times, but he would mainly just make fun of him from a distance, and people would actually kind of defend him in this timeline, with people getting close to Deku, not because he's like cool or anything like that, but just to try to get close to Omni-Man. Deku essentially grew up as being the kid with the pool, where everyone was only trying to be friends with him to use him for whatever he had to offer. And that would suck because whoever's not his friend would be trying to be his friend, but they would be doing a horrible job at it because everyone in the world just looks at him with so much pity and says, hey, that's Omni-Man's son. So Deku would get special treatment at school that he never would have gotten in the original story. And all the while that this would be happening, he would be feeling angry at the world because one, Deku keeps telling himself that he's not useless, that he's not powerless, and that his powers are just taking a long time to kick in, never actually giving hope like he would in the original, and actually holding on to like the chance that this might be the case. So in this specific timeline, Deku wouldn't be a complete weakling, like he's actually pretty strong in terms of his physique because he would work out with the hope that one day maybe he was going to be able to be a pro hero. He would even do a little bit of, boxing here and there, thanks to him, begging Omni-Man and his mom for that. And whenever he would come home, he would pretty much come home to seeing Inko and Omni-Man, doing their thing all the freaking time. So Deku would grow up having a cool life at home, but whenever he wasn't there, he was just treated with special privileges, and Deku hated that. He hated the looks of pity, yeah, I'm sure you're gonna just awaken your quirk later on, with Deku believing that to be the case, and his father telling him that he's just a late bloomer at first, but as the years would pass and he would see Deku getting sadder and more upset at the fact that he was really that useless, Omni-Man would finally confess to him that he doesn't come from this world, that while technically he might have been born on it, he's only half Earthling, confessing to Deku that, well, he's a Viltrumite, and that the fusion of a human and a Viltrumite might just take longer for him to awaken his powers, but to keep his chin up, telling him that one day he will awaken his powers, and he's going to be better than even he is. Izuku hearing that would, hold that close and dear to his heart, and that would be the thing that's pushing Deku to keep going throughout all these years. That said, we would finally pick the story up about 1 month prior to Izuku meeting All Might in the original, with him being in the school cafeteria talking to one of his school crushes that he finds really cute. And they're having a little conversation back and forth. She's asking what it's like to be the son of Omni-Man, and it must be so cool to travel the world whenever he wants because his dad is, well, who his dad is. Izuku, hearing that point of the conversation, would kind of start drifting off, being like, here we go, another person that just wants to use me to know more about my dad. He would sigh, but seeing as he really thinks that she's pretty, he continues talking to her, and Bakugo would walk by with his goons as he would bump Deku by the shoulder, being like, oops, didn't mean to hit you that hard, Omni boy. As he would then smirk and Deku would say, knock it off, Kachan, I'm not in the mood. At this point, Bakugo would blast an explosion in his hand, telling him, and what are you gonna do about it? As he would then turn to the girl that was talking to Izuku, telling her that she shouldn't even be hanging out with a loser like that she should lose the zero and get with the hero. I know, cringe, but I feel like that's something that Bakugo would say at this point. And after saying that, Deku would just kind of look at him with anger in his eyes, saying, not today, Bakugo, pushing him back, as Bakugo would say, so, your balls finally dropped today? Or is it just a case of you wanting to impress this girl that's clearly just into you for your dad? Deku, hearing that, would get pissed, throwing a punch at Bakugo, which Bakugo would quickly dodge before throwing an explosion square at the stomach of Izuku, causing him to fall down onto both of his knees and holding his stomach, as Bakugo would say, come on, Omni boy, get up, your father would have survived that hit, before then throwing another explosion, and Bakugo's goons would say, hey man, that's enough, you're taking it too far this time. Bakugo would say, nah, I don't think I'm taking it too far. This disappointment here only exists to be a pity magnet. Why don't I go ahead and put him out of his misery? He would turn towards the direction of Deku, trying to throw another explosion, but Deku, clenching his fist in rage, would proceed to punch Bakugo in the stomach, sending him flying through the room, crashing into 3 separate rooms and breaking like 4 walls, as he would pass out completely, and everybody who would have just watched this would begin cheering for Izuku. Think Sky High when I forgot what the boy's name was, but when he finally got his super strength and he ended up beating the bully bully in the cafeteria, I just realized that's where I get these little lunch scenes where he finally like becomes strong from sky high. Wow. I didn't know I've been poaching their series this whole time, but I digress. Point is, everyone's cheering for him and they're just like, Izuku, Izuku, Izuku. Some people would be like, I knew he'd get his powers eventually. And people were just like, yeah, we knew he wasn't gonna stay weak forever. Deku hearing that would be like, thanks guys, it really means a lot. But after this would happen, the principal would end up walking into the room and, you know, Bakugo, funny enough, would have actually been crashed into his office. And so the principal goes to Deku and tells him to come to his office. We would then get a scene of Deku with the broken wall, Bakugo being in the nurse's office, and the principal just sighing, tapping his pen over and over as it would click, 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 click. And finally, Omni-Man would actually enter the room alongside Inko. From here, the principal would actually begin explaining how everything went down, and seeing as there was a bunch of students there who weren't going to be giving Bakugo the benefit of the doubt in this timeline, they would actually be told the truth that Deku was really just defending himself and that Bakugo was actually the aggressor in this situation. Omni-Man hearing this would kind of nod, and after this would happen, Inko would hit him in the leg underneath the table as Omni-Man, turning towards Izuku, would look at him as he would just see him in a whole different light, being really upset at the fact that his son actually awakened his powers, because really, he had hoped that this would never happen, but now he's gonna have to deal with the fact that his son really is gonna be just like him. In this moment, he would have a stern face and the principal would tell them that Izuku's gonna be suspended for 2 days. Omni-Man hearing that would just look at Deku as Izuku would say, "Aren't you proud, Dad? I stood up to my bully and I finally got my powers." With Omni-Man just staring at him and just kind of looking at him bluntly before saying, "Frankly, I am happy that you got your powers. But I'm disappointed in you, Izuku. You took your powers, and the first thing that you did with them was beat up your classmate in school, in front of everybody. You embarrassed that kid, and you sent him to the hospital." Deku hearing that would be like, "But Dad, Bakugo's been bullying me ever since I was 4 years old. For once, I finally stood up to myself and all of a sudden I'm the bad guy? Everybody watching could tell you that I did nothing wrong. I defended myself. I would have left him alone if it wasn't for him coming over to me and bothering me like he tries to do every other week." But Izuku's father hearing this would simply turn to Deku and ask him how exactly it made him feel when he was getting bullied by Bakugo. Izuku would look down and say it made him feel weak, it made him feel helpless, made him feel bad. After saying that, he would go on to explain to Deku that that's exactly what he just did to that kid. But that's not even the worst of it. Had Izuku had access to all his powers and all the strength that he could muster, he could have killed the kid. And then what was he gonna do? Fight for him to be taken out of prison for making a dumb mistake in school over a cafeteria bullying incident? Deku hearing this would finally look down, realizing the severity of what he had just done. Yeah, all these years Bakugo was a jerk to him, and he made him feel bad, but the second that he had strength, he turned around and did the same thing back to his bully, realizing that at this point, he's just as bad as him. At this point, Deku would look down at the ground, feeling kind of ashamed for himself, as the principal would be thinking, "Can I step out maybe?" You know what I mean? Like, that's what's going through his head. Like, he feels bad for Deku. But at this point, Omni-Man would, sigh, be like, "Look, Izuku, I know you're excited that you finally got your powers, but you're gonna need to learn how to use them before you go flaunting them around or even getting into a fight. Remember, heroes don't kill. We save lives, Izuku. And that's what I'm gonna be training you to do." At this point, they would all stand up as Omni-Man would say, "Thanks for the heads up, principal, but I'll take things from here." He would grab Izuku and Inko and they would fly off as the principal would be like, "He's so cool." Once they would get home, Izuku, turning to Omni-Man, would apologize once again, saying that all he wanted to do was be like him, stand up to the bad guys. As Omni-Man, turning to Deku, would say, "You will be, but not like this," telling him that he'll be even better. As from here, he would actually begin to train Deku every single day, from this point of the story until the 10-month period is finally over. And during this time, the training would actually be so cool that I gotta cover it. The first thing Deku would work on would be flight. Deku would soar through the skies with his father, with him telling him that the way that this works is that they could create their own vantage points, essentially explaining what Omni-Man would do to Invincible in the original series, as Deku, fly with his father and they begin literally flying around the world. Omni-Man races in telling him whoever gets home last, has to do this, and this thing, you know what I mean? And it's just such cool scenes. Everything that would have happened with Omni-Man and Invincible and, the normal story would be kind of what's going on. And for the first month of Deku's training, Deku would start to sort of understand the basics, understanding how flight kind of works, kind of sucking with the landing still, but he would be very good at using his super strength, having a much better ability at gauging and holding back his punches whenever he needs to, but not lacking the ability to throw full power haymakers similarly to what All Might would do. And when it comes to his speed, well, he's a lot better at using that than anything else. Just at the beginning, it was kind of hard because he did have to go crashing into a couple of boxes to finally figure it out. Interestingly enough though, this wouldn't exactly be common knowledge that Deku has these powers, because Omni-Man would personally see to it that anything remotely, resembling the topic of, Deku having powers now would be something that he would essentially go to the government and tell them to blacklist, where people are not going to be finding out about this until Deku was finally ready. And so, not a lot of people would find out about this as the day of the first episode of the anime would come around, and Deku would be making his way to school, seeing a gigantic villain in the scene, with Deku looking down at his clock and being like, looks like I got time. Deku, seeing this villain, would proceed to fly towards it, as in a flash, Deku would punch it square in the face, sending it crashing onto the ground, as Deku would be in and out of there before anybody could have even seen it was him. He was a blur, but one thing they could definitely see was his school uniform. Though, after doing that, Deku would make his way to class, and he would be extremely giddy, thinking to himself that he's proud of himself. He just took out his first villain in his first try, and that was a piece of cake. As he would make his way into the classroom, and the teacher would walk inside, going on to pretty much throw papers up into the air and being like, I know you all want to become heroes! Everyone starts flaunting their quirks, and then he starts explaining, what they're going to be doing with their futures. As the teacher would eventually start revealing who it is that's going to be going to the national school, UA High. He would then list off the name Katsuki Bakugo, and Bakugo with a smirk would go on to say, that's right, he's going to be getting into UA, and he's going to be the first hero from this cruddy school to make history. As, then the teacher would say, oh, Midoriya, you also want to get in, but of course you're going to get in, you're the son of Omni-Man. Bakugo hearing that would have a angry vein in his head come over, as he'd be like, damn Deku with his newfound powers. I'm gonna crush that damn nerd. He would turn his gaze towards the direction of Deku glaring at him and promising that he was gonna be crushing him one day. As Deku would say, yeah, whatever, Bakugo. And everybody in the class would begin pretty much just praising Deku, being like, hey, don't forget us when you're famous. Hey, remember, can I still get that autograph from your dad? As, Deku would be like, sure. And then one kid would come up and be like, could I get your autograph? Deku would be like, sure. I'll bring you my dad's. Wait, did you want mine? As he'd say, of course I want the autograph of the next #1 hero. You're gonna do amazing. Deku in this moment would kind of realize that things really are gonna change for him, and he would look around the class as he would finally realize that those looks that he used to get, they're completely gone. The eyes that everyone's looking at him with are eyes of, just waiting for something amazing to happen. Like that one scene in The Incredibles where that little kid's like, I don't know, I guess just something amazing to happen, I guess. Like everyone's just looking at him with awe and excitement, like just wondering what the future holds for Deku. And with that being the case, Bakugo at the end of classroom, when everybody would be dismissed, he'd walk up to Deku going, hey Deku, I know you're gonna sign up for the national school, and we're both probably gonna be getting in, but just know this, I'm gonna be the next #1 hero, you damn nerd. Quirk or no quirk, I'm gonna make a name for myself on my own, and I'm eventually gonna get stronger than you. So watch your back, Izuku. As he would walk off angrily, and his friends would be like, I don't know if you should be talking to him like that now, Bakugo. I mean, he is as strong as Omni-Man, I guess. As Bakugo turning to them would be like, him as strong as Omni-Man? I'll believe it when I feel it. His last punch was nothing. one of them would be thinking, he did knock you out, but Bakugo's like, next time I'll be ready for his lame punch. As he would walk off and we would get Bakugo going off with his friends, similarly to the same, stuff that goes down in canon, with Deku realizing that, he kind of wants to go home. Deku at this point, for no other reason than plot, would take the same path that he would have taken in the original, just for convenience sake, as Deku's walking, eventually he can hear some commotion going on behind him, as the lid of a sewage would actually go shooting upwards, and this green gooey slime would actually rush towards him saying, perfect, you're gonna be a real hero to me, kid, give me your body. He would begin to try to surround Izuku, but Izuku, using his newfound speed, would blitz out of the sludge villain's way saying, guess you must not have heard, but I got my powers now. As the sludge villain, getting a good glance at Izuku this time, would be like, wait, what? What did he mean by powers? As getting a good glance, he would realize, that's Omni-Man's son. And he would then click, my powers. He, looking towards the direction of Izuku, would feel utter fear, as Deku, reeling his arm back, would throw a punch that would scatter the sludge villain everywhere. As a couple moments later, All Might would burst through going, I am here? He would see that the sludge villain was already taken care of, and turning his gaze towards the direction of Deku, seeing him would be like, you're Omni-Man's boy. I heard you got your quirk. How is it, young man? I can already tell by taking this villain out that you're gonna make a fine hero. Easily Japan's #1, as he would smirk, and Izuku, seeing All Might, would actually feel pretty cool as he would, walk up to him and talk to him as if they're kind of old buddies, helping him pick up pieces of the sludge as he would ask All Might how things are being a hero. All Might would hold a little bit of a small talk conversation with him, but ultimately knowing that his, time limit was gonna run out, he would simply jump away with Izuku watching him go off, and Izuku would think to himself, well, no one's looking, are they? So he would fly towards the direction of his house, and he would then finally end up crashing in his garden as his mom would have been there gardening, and Deku would be like, my head, is that ever gonna get easier? But Inko, looking at Izuku's direction, would be like, Izuku, get inside, go clean yourself off for dinner, your father's gonna be home any minute now. As Izuku, feeling scared of his mom, would do just that, making his way inside of his house and doing exactly what she asked for. As like Inko said, Omni-Man would end up arriving, and after having a quick dinner break, Deku would go off into the skies with Omni-Man as their training would begin, and over the course of the next 10 months, Deku would practically master every aspect of his quirk, going on a bunch of hero patrol missions with his father, scouting out different areas of the world which have different policies in terms of their, hero licensing and stuff like that, and going to different places where villains were kind of different and regulations were obviously different as well. That being the case, Deku would go off and he would end up bagging a couple villains alongside the help of Omni-Man. During the course of this 10-month time skip, Deku would practice racing his father every single day until eventually he was capable of actually keeping up very closely with him, and he would do combat training, which was Izuku's least favorite activity, considering that he always got pummeled, and man did his father not hold back. It stung like hell to get hit by his dad, but regardless, Deku's just happy to be having his powers and training with his father every day. Deku would eventually visit Omni-Man's agency all the time, learning the ins and outs of running one, which, interestingly enough, Omni-Man would actually be a one-man show, not wanting a hero agency in the normal sense since he doesn't need any help. He doesn't join some organization just like the original Omni-Man would, and he doesn't operate in the same, justice sense that everybody else does. Yes, he doesn't kill villains, technically on the record, but similarly to how he operates in Invincible, he's not going to be a guardian of the world or whatever it is that they're called. But that said, eventually the 10 months would finally be over, and Deku would feel more than ready to go in and ace the entrance exam, which at this point was more of a formality because Omni-Man's not exactly just going to be gifting everything to his son, and it's kind of going to be a bit of a surprise that he's going to be participating in this, because not a lot of people are actually aware of the fact that he has unlocked his quirk, or powers, technically speaking. So when Deku steps forward and the cameras turn towards him of who's actually going to be participating, the lights would be bright. A bunch of pictures would be taken of him, and a bunch of little articles would go viral of people saying that he's going to be attempting the quirk, the UA entrance exam without a quirk, with most people thinking that he doesn't have a quirk, and a couple people saying that they've heard that rumors about him actually unlocking his powers, wondering if they're true. Safe to say, the world's in for a rude awakening once Deku gets his hand on a couple of robots. So he would make his way outside, taking the written exam, acing that easily, or, yeah, he's still gonna ace it because it's Deku. Come on, like, the dude is a literal, not genius, but he's a smart pants, right? He's a nerd. So Deku would go inside and eventually be making his way towards the robots section, where he would make his way towards the front, just kind of waiting for time to pass by. Deku at this point would be feeling zero sense of nervousness or anything else, just excited to show the world that he's going to be living up to the expectations that they've all had for him and more. So he's planning to go in there and just decimate as many robots as possible. His goal is to essentially leave nothing for the rest of his classmates to actually fight. So as soon as the starting, whistle would blow, or, President Mike would say, go, 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 Deku would blast off using his super speed, creating a sonic boom as he would go towards the direction of 3 robots, punching through each and every single one of them, doing the same to every other robot that comes close into contact with him, and just doing his job, looking marvelous at it. The dude would proceed to stun every single person watching the UA exam, as they would all smile and they would think, yeah, he's legit, that's Omni-Man's son, alright. Nezu, seeing this, would be very excited at the fact that Izuku was even choosing to go to a hero school, knowing that with his father like his, he didn't even need their training, but he's pretty happy that UA Academy is going to be having him there. So after Izuku's incredible display, 5 minutes would pass as the 0 pointer would finally be unveiled, and Deku, seeing this gigantic robot standing in before him, would smirk, thinking that this is his chance to show off. Deku would let the 0 pointer create a bit of rubble until eventually he would realize that he made a mistake, seeing that a girl actually got caught in rubble thanks to him not taking it out much sooner. And so Deku would fly in feeling really bad about the fact that, she hurt her ankle, flying underneath the robot and flying it all the way up to space, having done meteor training and, defending the world from asteroids already with his father over the course of the 10 months. As Deku would pierce both of his arms into the robot's legs, spinning as he would throw the robot into outer space. And all the students watching, the ones that, weren't too confident in their own abilities, would just think to themselves that they don't belong here. As, they kind of just give up on all hopes of ever joining UA, although while Deku's floating in the air and everyone's just looking at him as if he was some sort of god or something. But he's not. He's just an alien. That said, Deku would go through destroying a couple more robots, and realizing that everybody else literally didn't get to destroy many robots, would actually feel bad, noting that he probably went a bit overkill. So Deku would just, smile as the test would finally be over, and they would tell everybody that they'll be letting them know if they pass shortly, as everybody would make their way home, and Deku would be seen flying off, making his way to his house as he would land and finally do it right this time. He would look at his mother being like, hey, I'm home, and guess what? I'm almost positive that I aced that exam. I destroyed nearly every robot. As Inko, hearing this, would be like, that's awesome, sweetie. She would go on to pretty much start expressing how proud she is of her son for how far he's come, and Izuku would smile, telling her that he's so happy that he finally unlocked this quirk and has the opportunity to live up to the expectations that everybody's placed on him. Inko, hearing this, however, would be like, Izuku, is that really why you're so happy? I thought it was because you could do what you've always wanted, not to please other people. Deku, hearing that, would kind of be like, what do you mean, Mom? I'm trying to do both. I want to be like Dad. As Inko would go over towards Izuku, grabbing his face and telling him that he already is. As, she, pretty much is saying that he looks like him, and, she's made him proud, and he's her son, and he has the powers. Deku would smile at her. She would say, now hurry up and go shower. You smell bad. Smiling as Deku would say, alright, Mom, and he would make his way hitting the showers as Omni-Man would arrive home after having stopped the catastrophe on the other side of the world, and Inko would look at him saying that she still can't believe that he made it public news that he's their son, saying that the media's completely gone nuts, putting all these dumb expectations on her son. But Omni-Man would simply say that something like that was inevitable, and she would sigh, saying, I know, I wish he didn't grow up so fast. Omni-Man thinking the same, and also being lost in thought about the fact that his son finally got his powers and what this actually meant for the future of his plans. After all, he still had to conquer Earth, and Izuku having these Viltrumite abilities was going to be complicating everything. He was originally just going to wait for them to grow old and die, and then conquer the earth, but now he can't even do that because his son's gonna be living long enough to see countless generations just come and go. Plus, there's the fact that there is that doomsday quirk theory, where he's noticed that every generation of quirk people have gotten stronger and stronger. And if he lets the humans continue this way, well, they might just end up getting just as strong as the Viltrumites in a couple thousand years, but still, it could happen. At this point, Omni-Man would actually begin planning how things are going to be going forward, because in this timeline, Omni-Man doesn't exactly have the ability of just rounding the heroes out all in one place and just killing each one on the go, right? That's not exactly how this works. So him killing all the heroes that he would in the original with the Guardians of the Earth or whatever is not going to be going as smoothly as it is. He's going to have to take them all out one by one, or at least the strongest ones in the world. Which one fight that I definitely gotta cover has to be Star and Stripes. Which, speaking of, I really have been heavily considering the prospect of making What If Deku had New Order, but I wouldn't be too comfortable making that specific one by myself, and it would probably be a collab with that one because I just love it when me and him make those podcast style what ifs. I mean, we've already done that with a recent one lately called What If Naruto Had a Time Dojutsu. Go check that one out. But self-plugging aside, Deku, unsurprisingly so, would eventually get his acceptance letter from UA, being told that not only was he accepted, but he was going to be given a full ride and scholarship, and everything that he was going to be needing for school was absolutely free. Not that it mattered, because they weren't exactly struggling with money in any way, shape, or form. So, Deku would arrive at school grounds. As walking inside, Deku would notice one specific person in the classroom, Katsuki Bakugo. Seeing this, Deku would simply make his way toward the section of the class that he's not sitting at, and he would look up as he would eventually see a girl with ginger hair walking in, which would be Kendo from Class 1B originally, which in this timeline, we're going to be giving her Adam Eve's powers. So she's going to be taking the place of Invisible Girl in this timeline, and we're just going to be throwing her into the classroom as an addition. That said, when Deku sees her, he just could not hide the fact that he had practically fallen in love, as she would walk over towards him and say, "So, guess the rumors are true. Omni-Man's son's in my class." Deku, hearing this, wouldn't be sure whether to be upset or mad or happy that she knows who he is, as Deku would say, "Yeah, nice to meet ya." He would stretch out his hand and she would do the same, as they would both have a little bit of like a little bit of a handshake moment, and after this she would proceed to take the seat right next to him. In this moment, she would begin to talk to him, but Deku, not realizing what she's saying because he's literally just staring at her and daydreaming about dating her, would pretty much be like, "Huh? What?" Before Aizawa would finally, get out of his little sleeping bag and be like, "If you're just here to make friends, then I suggest you leave." As he would go on to tell them to put these outfits on and meet him outside. People would begin questioning who the heck he is, as he would say, "My name's Shota Aizawa, and I'm your homeroom teacher. Now put these on. Don't make me say it twice." Everybody would do so, going outside and putting on these little outfits, as the guys inside of the changing room would be like, "Whoa, I can't believe the fact that Omni-Man's son is in our class. Is it true that he did this?" People would begin talking to Izuku about that, and Izuku would just be like, "Guess things never change," as he would kind of just ignore most of them, and Bakugo would just be glaring at Deku, with Deku being like, "What? You want to take our little middle school rivalry to UA? Because I don't mind kicking your ass a few more times, Bakugo." Bakugo, looking at him, would be like, "What'd you say, you damn nerd?" As Deku would say, "You heard me." And he would walk out, with Bakugo gritting his teeth and, just holding back and restraining himself from fighting him. After this would happen, Aizawa would go on to throw the ball towards Deku's direction, telling him to throw it as far as he possibly can, and that anything goes so long as he's within the circle. Aizawa would be expecting nothing less than for him to get an incredible score, and that's exactly what he would do. When he would throw the ball, the meter that was pretty much measuring how far it went would break, as it wasn't able to register that many miles or kilometers, right? That being the case, the ball would be thrown across the world. It would literally go all the way across the world and land back in Deku's hand, as he would say that he's been playing catch with his father. And everybody watching this would be like, "Did he just," with Mineta saying, "He just threw the ball around the world. That's incredible." As people would begin, talking about how awesome it is to have Deku in their class, and Aizawa would say, "Quiet down. All your lives you've been yada yada yada." He gives his little speech, and ultimately we would get the rest of the events play out. Deku would absolutely destroy every single test. The 50-meter dash, forget about it. He's the fastest. Grip strength, he shatters the machine. Standing long jump, he clears it. Repeated side to side steps, he moves so fast that the ground itself would break, and Izuku would look like he's been standing still, but really he was moving that whole time. The ball throw, well, we already know what happened. It wrapped around the world. And the 3 remaining tests, which were push-ups, sit-ups, and toe touches, well, safe to say Deku aced those pretty well, considering that he had always been keeping up with his training physically all his life. He just unfortunately had bad luck having to have a bully be somebody who's pretty much a terrorist with an overpowered quirk, at least for your everyday run-of-the-mill teenager. But that said, everybody would watch in anticipation, wondering who's going to be the person that would be expelled, as Aizawa, for plot purposes, because I don't like the fact that I'll always expel Mineta, but then I'll forget that I expelled him and I'll act like he's still in the story. So he still exists. Aizawa's gonna, pass him just this time, and everybody's just gonna be super excited at the fact that none of them ended up actually failing this thing. So after this would take place, everyone would just wrap around Izuku and just be like, whoa, you're incredible, dude. You're the best. You're this, you're that. Like, you're so strong. You have so much potential. Kaminari would be like, dude, it's so lucky to have a quirk like yours. Kaminari or Kirishima would be like, you're a man. And then you pretty much have Kendo walking up towards Deku's direction saying that he's pretty good at using his quirk for somebody that just got it. As she says that in a bit of a teasing manner, and Deku, looking back at her, would say, is that right? She would smile and say, yeah, it is, as she would ask if he's faster than her, and Izuku would say, I'd love to see. And so the both of them would practically be getting ready to go fly off and see who's actually faster than the other, but Aizawa, looking towards, Adam Eve's direction, which is, what she pretty much is, he would cancel her quirk, and as Deku went off the ground, he would realize that she was unable to fly, remembering that, yeah, her abilities are a quirk, but they're not. So he was able to freely fly through the air with Aizawa's quirk cancellation power having absolutely zero effect on him. This would stun Aizawa, who would come to realize that Deku's powers aren't actually a quirk, or maybe it's just a mutation quirk, something that he can't turn off. As he would go on to tell them that even though they're at UA High, their quirk usage outside of school is strictly prohibited. He would tell them to walk home, as they both would look at each other and kind of nod, acknowledging that it sucks that they're not able to just use their powers freely, but whatever, it is what it is. It's My Hero Academia, not the world that they come from. So Deku and Kendo would actually make their way home, with her kind of flirting with Deku a little bit, and Deku, not exactly saying no, because in this timeline, there's not going to be any Rex in the picture, which, speaking of Rex, before I even recorded this video, I was actually watching Invincible, and I was seeing that one scene where Eve's dad literally tells her to, and I quote, just forgive him. Literally just forgive him, after he blatantly cheated on her in what was the most disrespectful way that I think I have ever seen. He cheated on her with 3 of the other girls. That's insane. That's absolutely diabolical. That's straight up villain activity. But I digress. After this would happen, all the students would make their way home, with Izuku getting Kendo's number, and the reason that she's Adam Eve in this timeline is because, well, honestly, because she's a ginger. So yeah, moving on, we now get the battle trial arc, and this would kind of be a little bit of a boring day. Obviously, the students would have their general course studies, and after all that would finally be over, the students would all be wondering when exactly Aizawa was getting here for their hero training class. But Aizawa wouldn't walk into the classroom. It would actually be All Might, as he would walk into the classroom going, I am here, walking in through the door like a normal person, making his introduction with everybody getting excited, including Izuku, because he had no idea this was happening. And Izuku's excited because if he had to pick another #1 hero or someone that's his favorite other than his dad, it definitely had to be All Might. So Deku, seeing All Might walk inside, who can light 1,000,000 rooms up with his personality, would be so happy that he's going to be learning under somebody like him. He would be listening to every word of All Might's lips, and then we would finally get him revealing the costumes, as everybody would suit up. And luckily for Izuku, he's not going to be wearing that disgusting rabbit suit or whatever it is that you want to call it. Instead, he's going to be wearing the classic Invincible suit that you guys see in the thumbnail. And after everybody would walk out with their pro hero outfits, All Might would go on to announce that today they're going to be learning how to be heroes by being directly thrown into the fire. Deku, hearing that, would remember the time that he actually had to jump into a burning building to go save a bunch of people, courtesy of his dad, and safe to say, he dang near made the building collapse because when he flew inside, he nearly couldn't stick the landing. So, after that painful memory would finally be over from Deku's mind, Deku would go on to select the number and essentially be paired up with, wouldn't you know it, Kendo, or as we know her, Adam Eve. Shortly after this happens, we would then see Bakugo selecting the team that's directly going to be competing against Deku's team, as Izuku would stare at Bakugo, who would have a smirk on his face, showing Izuku that he was going to be fighting him and that he was going to be getting his revenge sooner rather than later. But Deku wasn't worried, knowing that if all he has to face off against is Bakugo, then this should be a walk in the park. Kendo, seeing the way that Bakugo would look at Deku, would ask if they know each other, as Izuku would say that yeah, that was his childhood bully before he got his powers, saying that he thought he could just beat him around just because he didn't have these abilities, but now it's time to flip the script. And no one could actually get mad at him this time because it's not like he's doing this out of malice. It's just a training exercise, right? Kendo would smirk, saying, yeah, it is. As the both of them would make their way inside, and funny enough, if either of them really wanted to, they could just fly directly towards the bomb and steal it from Ida without him even being able to do a thing about it. But Deku, wanting to face off against Bakugo, would tell Eve to hold off just until he beats him. So Eve would fly outside of the building saying, copy that, Izuku, as she would essentially be flying right outside the building that Ida actually has the bomb inside of, or the room, sorry, as Deku would simply kind of just wait in the 3rd floor, as suddenly Bakugo would come turning the corner, throwing an explosion at Deku's face, which Deku, seeing this practically happen in slow motion, would dodge out of the way saying, saw that coming. Bakugo from here would say, yeah, well see this, shooting a smoke screen before diverting himself and appearing behind Deku and blowing the explosion in his back. Deku would be like, yeah, definitely did not see that one coming, as he would then throw a punch towards the direction of Bakugo's gauntlet, not wanting to aim for that, but Bakugo would have blocked with that, shattering it instantly, as Bakugo would be like, huh, and his arm would actually feel some of the recoil damage. He would then turn towards Deku, as he would then shoot explosion after explosion after explosion at Deku's direction, but Deku just tanks this, and Bakugo would then actually begin flying away using his explosion quirk, creating some distance, as he would say, try this on for size, shooting an AP shot at Deku, which he would develop earlier than in the original, as Deku would actually feel that a little bit, but ultimately fly towards Bakugo's direction, with him saying, stay away, damn it, and blowing an explosion which creates a massive amount of smoke. At this point, Bakugo, realizing that he can't beat him on a head-on battle, would wait for his gauntlet to fill up, as suddenly he would turn the corner as Deku comes flying in to see where he's at. Bakugo would say, these gauntlets aren't just for show, pulling the pin before telling him, try dodging this, and a gigantic explosion would fill the room, as Deku would tank the blow head on. And seeing as the original version of Izuku was able to tank that explosion, I see no reason why this Viltrumite version of him wouldn't be able to handle it like a champ. So tanking the blow, Deku would just stand there as his suit would be the only thing that really took damage, and he would then punch Bakugo one more good time in the stomach, as he would knock him out and wrap his capture tape around him, with Izuku using his intercom to tell her that she could take the bomb now. In this moment, she would use her energy powers to pretty much blow a hole through the building and fly inside, as Ida would try to stop her, but using a barrier that she would create out of that pink energy she could make, would proceed to block it off as she would fly towards the bomb, taking it, as we the viewers would hear, "Hero Team wins!" And Izuku and Adam Eve would pretty much go on a smile, smirking or whatever. By the way, would you guys be interested in a what if Deku had Adam Eve's powers? Her powers are pretty sick, like the little pink rays and stuff like that. I feel like they're perfect for the My Hero verse, and just strong enough that he might still be able to go through the entire story unharmed. Actually, probably not. I feel like he might still die to the villains. Just because no one for all, kind of bad for you when you have to face against a super powered Shigaraki, which is kind of unfair towards the end of the story. Moving on though, after the events of the battle trial arc would be over, the students would then be informed about the USJ situation, and with all of them being given permission slips, we would pretty much get a scene of Izuku telling Inko to sign off on this, that he's going to be doing some rescue training. She would say, what's the point? Guess I can't be too worried since your dad threw you into the fire 10 months ago, am I right? Izuku, looking at her, would say, you have no idea. As she would smile, telling him that made him into the man he is today. And Deku would say, I guess so. This is kind of going to be a bit of a walk in the park. Honestly, Mom, I'm kind of regretting going to UA. I should have just taken Dad's offer and became a hero off the bat. All this stuff is boring, but I guess there's one good thing that comes out of it. Inko would say, oh, and what's that? Izuku would say, nothing, forget I mentioned it. As she would say, it's a girl, isn't it? As Izuku, turning towards his mom, would say, Mom! And she would say, well, don't worry, don't be embarrassed, you're getting about that age. Actually, has your father given you the talk? And Deku would be like, Mom! As she'd be like, kidding. With Deku making his way to his room and getting a text from her asking what he's doing, Izuku reading the message would be like, nothing much, what about you? He would then wait a couple seconds as she would say, nah, nothing either. Want to go out for a flight? As Izuku, hearing that would say where and when. And she would go on to text a location as Deku would sneak out of his window and go meet Kendo, who would be on top of the building just kind of looking on at the sunset. Deku, seeing this, would ask her what's up and why she called them. As she would go on to actually, instead of laying, some riz on him or whatever, which is what he was expecting, just a day where they were able to flirt it up with each other, she actually gets deep and starts telling Deku things, which I can't think of right now, but just imagine they have a little bit of a deep conversation on the lines of, what do you think life's gonna be like when yada 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 yada? Deku pretty much listens to her, and after everything would be over, she would lay her head on his shoulder as Deku would turn bright red, and she would be like, what? Am I moving too fast for you? Izuku would look at her and say, no, not at all. I've done this before. As she would say, sure you have, Casanova, before laying her head back on him and saying she's just kidding. Deku would say, yeah, kidding, right? As he and her would just go on to enjoy the rest of the day, making their way towards a burger parlor where they would get some food and finally make their way back to Izuku's house, where he would walk inside and actually have forgotten that he snuck out. Inko at the door would be like, so you're finally home, aren't ya? And she would then be greeted to the side of Kendo. She, looking at Izuku, would be like, I guess I can't get you in trouble now. She would give him a look before looking at her and saying, so this is the girl. And Deku would be like, Mom, don't embarrass me. She would say, what? I'm not embarrassing you. She would go on to ask her what her name is, and they would have a slight conversation before they would run to Izuku's room, and she would say, keep the door open. Deku would be like, I know, Mom. And they would make their way upstairs. They keep talking it up and talk about comic books and yada yada yada. Deku asks what her family's like, and she's all like, they're cool. Maybe you'll meet them one day. As Izuku would say, what do you mean one day? You already met my mom. And she's like, yeah, I met your mom just to come up to your room, but not as your girlfriend. Don't get ahead of yourself. Deku would look at her as he would realize that she has a point. He thought that they were already dating. I mean, that moment did mean something to him. She would go on to say that, yeah, it meant something to her too, but he hasn't exactly asked her out. And Izuku would say, are you saying that if I did so, you would say yes? She would say, maybe. As Izuku would look at her and say, all right then, well, you want to go out with me? And she would say, you do realize we already went out. Deku, looking at her, would say, all right, fine, want to be my girlfriend? He would turn red, and Inko was making her way towards the room, and overhearing this, she would be like, there goes my little boy. As, she walks away, and, Kendo would just look at Deku as she would say, definitely. As at this point, Omni-Man would actually get home, and we would get a scene of Inko and him talking things over. I know I keep calling him Omni-Man, but come on now, what do y'all want me to refer him as? Nolan? He gets home and, they have a little conversation with Inko, and, they talk about how Deku's up there with a girl or whatever. They never see her leave because he just flies off through the window and says, bye, Zuku, I'll see you tomorrow. As they would indeed be seeing each other tomorrow. They would be on the bus making their way to the USJ as people would be talking about who has the coolest quirk in the classroom. People would say that the coolest quirk has to be between Todoroki, Bakugo, Izuku, and Kendo, saying that their quirks are the flashiest of everybody's, but if they had to pick the strongest, then it has to be Izuku, right? I mean, he has the same powers as Omni-Man, and he's the strongest hero in the world, not just Japan, Suyu would say, as people listening on would say, yeah, that is true. As Kaminari would chip in saying, yeah, I guess, but Todoroki is the son of the number 3 hero in Japan, so we can't exactly write him off. And they would say, that's true, that's true. As Izuku and Kendo would be in the back of the bus, kind of holding hands, as, Deku's just wondering, like, what's he supposed to do now? Like, he has a girlfriend, but what exactly does this entail? And so, they would make their way to the USJ, and the Pro Hero 13 goes on to have her little yap session, which we're all accustomed to. Suddenly, a purple mist would envelop the entire area, and Kurogiri would begin teleporting all the students to different locations. As this would happen, Deku would find himself inside of the water section of the area, and he would fly directly out of there, as he would begin to look throughout the entire area and realize that this is 100% a villain attack. Deku, seeing this, would fly inside of the water as he would pick up Mineta, and Suyu would leap onto the boat. Deku, realizing that all these villains inside of the water are going to be causing heavy damage unless he does something about it, would fly back into the water as he would beat the brakes out of each and every single one of them inside of their own domain, mind you. Just like what if Deku was Toji? Link in description. Actually, no, I'm doing the most. Link is not in the description. Just look the video up. Anyways, after this would happen, Deku would look towards the direction of where Aizawa's currently at, facing off against a bunch of villains, as he would fly past that, trying to see where Eve's at, but he would realize that she's no longer even in there. She would have actually gone to fly off, going to call for All Might, not really too worried knowing that her boyfriend's around, and Izuku, realizing this, would simply fly down towards where Aizawa was at, as he was about to have his elbow be decayed by Shigaraki. But not on Deku's watch. He comes in and punches Shigaraki into the ground, sending him crashing onto the ground as a gigantic bird would appear behind Deku, and Shigaraki would say, "You shouldn't have done that, brat." Suddenly, the Nomu would punch Deku, sending him flying away, as Deku would definitely have felt that one, getting back up as the Nomu would rush towards him trying to deliver another blow, but Deku, using his super speed, would dodge out of the way before then throwing a punch so hard at the Nomu that it would actually cause its head to spin multiple times on its body. It would then spin back into place as it would heal, and Shigaraki would say, "It has a healing factor and shock absorption, so your punches won't do a thing." But Deku, hearing that, would simply hear that as a challenge, going, "Is that so?" As he would proceed to grab the Nomu by the head, throwing it up into the air, high up into the sky, as he would begin pummeling it in the air itself without Aizawa's assistance of nullifying its quirk or anything like that, and proceed to absolutely pummel it with like 15 blows before uppercutting into straight up space itself. And with the Nomu having absolutely no brain and no one controlling it, it would simply freeze out in the atmosphere of space, as Shigaraki would watch in horror that this kid was able to do this so easily against the Nomu. He would retreat alongside Kurogiri, and Deku would simply watch as they would escape through their portal. Couple minutes later, Deku would round out the rest of the villains that were attacking people that were struggling, and after this would happen, cleanup would take place with All Might not having to move a muscle. Everything was practically soloed by Izuku himself. But there is one loose end that Deku would have left behind. Who exactly was behind all of this? And Deku, getting home after this whole thing would happen, would go on to tell his father about a villain that was I was gonna use the word dastardly, but once I said it, I was just like, whoa there, partner, like, you don't speak like that, but we're gonna roll with it. Dastardly enough to actually try to attack their school. As Izuku would say, "I don't know, but I think that they were there to kill All Might." Him hearing this would ask Izuku if he knows any names, being like, "Names, kid." As Izuku would be like, I don't know, they were just trying to attack us. Are you listening to a thing I said? I handled the thing all by myself, Dad. Aren't you proud?" He would look at him and go, "Yeah, son, I am." But in his head, he would simply be thinking that whoever was responsible for this needs to die, because this wasn't just an attempt at killing All Might. This was a power play. This was him saying that he's not scared of Izuku, and he wants to make sure that whoever this is well aware of the fact that you don't challenge a Viltrumite. But regardless, after this would take place, Deku would make his way up to his room, where he would get a text from his girlfriend, and they begin talking back and forth, and they would actually start talking about doing some training, seeing as school kind of got put on pause for about a week after what had ended up taking place in the USJ. They would actually end up flying towards different parts of the world, where they would actually go on to stop different villain attacks, and they would actually actually go crazy on the news, to the point where once they return back to school, the students would actually be like, what's this we hear about you guys going off and actually doing hero work in other places? You know, they're all jealous. They're like, how are you guys able to do so well? Like, why are you guys so much better than us? Kaminar's like, I wish I had your quirks. As you know, they're just like, well, we're just gifted. What can we say? They'd be like, that's the understatement of the year. As we would then get Aizawa be like, all right, settle down, settle down. Look, while I might not agree with what you guys are doing in terms of your hero activities outside of Japan, I have no jurisdiction there. So whatever you did out there stays out there. Got it? He would then give them both a glare as they would both nod their heads, and he would then proceed to explain that shortly they're going to be having the UA Sports Festival. Everybody would get extremely excited, and as this would happen, Uraraka would actually be one of the main characters to be like, are you ready? Like, are you guys excited? And everybody's all just getting hyped up. Eventually the class bell would ring and they would all be making their way to lunch, but the door would be clogged by a bunch of other students from general course, class 1B, different other, tracks or whatever, and Izuku would wonder why exactly they're here, but one person would actually catch a bit of his attention, Shinso, who would go on to say that it must be nice to have such flashy quirks, saying that if they're not careful, he's gonna take one of their spots. Deku, hearing this, however, would not be worried at all, knowing that nothing that this world can throw at him will challenge him. At least not if he's half as strong as his father is, that said. As they would all make their way towards lunch and have an awesome day before another week would pass, and Izuku would find himself on a podium about to give a speech in front of thousands. I was gonna say millions, but yeah, no, thousands of people who would have filled up the arena, ready to watch as all these future heroes were about to wow them with their incredible quirks. He would go on to give a pretty cool speech as the crowd would get into it thanks to that, and then we would get Pro Hero Midnight being the announcer for everything, with her announcing that the first event was a race, which Deku completely aces, getting first place, followed by second place by his girlfriend, third place Katsuki Bakugo, fourth place Todoroki, and you get the picture. After this would take place, we would then get the cavalry battle, which interestingly enough, thanks to Izuku's girlfriend, would actually be an event that I don't even need to cover, and I'm pretty grateful for that because I hate the cavalry battle. She uses her energy force field to pretty much keep everybody away from him, and Bakugo and Todoroki wouldn't be foolish enough to try to test Deku here. Not yet, at least. That said, they would move on to the 1v1 battles, and Deku would find himself face off against Shinso Hitoshi, who shockingly enough, he would actually end up beating with no problem, not even being put under Shinso's mind control, because all his life, literally all his life, Deku has been hearing the worst from everybody, seeing articles talking about how weak he is, so somebody telling him it must be nice to be born with a strong quirk? Yeah, that's not going to be rubbing a nerve for Deku. He doesn't care at all, simply blitzing at Shinso before he even gets the chance to say anything else to try to piss him off to get an answer, as he would punch him off of the arena and he would move on to a second match, which would be against Todoroki. Adam Eve would do exactly the same, beating whoever her opponent would be, and they would both move on to the second match, which Deku would have to face off against Todoroki. Now, once this match would actually be announced, everyone would start getting hyped up, considering that these two are the sons of top 5 pro heroes, saying that Izuku's obviously the son of Omni-Man, and Todoroki is the son of Endeavor, with a half hot, half cold quirk. President Mike would begin being like, are you ready, guys? We're about to witness an incredible fight between two incredible prodigies. Everybody's just, watching on. They're all super excited. And then the battle would begin. Todoroki would start everything off by shooting a gigantic amount of ice at him, as Deku would simply fly right through it. Having the capability of flying straight through a mountain, ice would be no big deal. He would proceed to grab Todoroki by the collar, as he would proceed to punch him square in the face, sending him crashing onto the ground, with Todoroki having tried to use his flame quirk to stop Deku, but bro, it just wasn't working. Deku just absolutely walked all over Todoroki, and not only did he do that, but he actually proceeds to rub sand on the wound, looking towards the direction of everybody and waving, being like, I'm the best, I'm the best. The crowd goes wild. They're like, of course he couldn't compete with the son of Omni-Man. They're like, he has a credible quirk, but he's not the son of Omni-Man. And all the while, Izuku's father would be watching on from a TV, actually proud, but still, he can't shake off that feeling of just not feeling comfortable with his son having a quirk, because I've already explained why, but yeah, that's the reason. After this would happen, we would then get a battle between, instead of Denki Kaminari, we would get, Izuku's girlfriend versus the plant girl who has like the really cool plant powers, which she would ultimately be defeated by Kendo in this round. As we would then get Deku facing off against Ida in the semifinals, as he would wipe the floor with him, making an absolute mockery of Ida's Recipro Burst and his engine quirk. He would move on to the finals, where he would be met up with none other than his girlfriend. The second that the match would start, Deku would simply walk off saying that he's not about to hit his girlfriend, and everybody in the crowd would be like, "His what?" As Deku would have just made everything official, and she would just facepalm and be like, "Damn it, Deku, you couldn't at least have faked the victory to make me look good?" But Deku would be more than comfortable with second place, with everybody cheering them on and be like, "Yeah, he's the best boyfriend. Yeah, the girl's so lucky, she's dating him. She's dating Omni-Man's son, yada yada yada." Everyone's going crazy. Deku would be given the second place medal, and after this would happen, they would go out and celebrate with some ice cream, courtesy of Omni-Man and Izuku, who would go on to take them to Paris, where they end up having an incredible time, and Deku just walks the Eiffel Tower with his girlfriend and has a really cute date after that. That said, Omni-Man would finally start beginning the first phases of his plan, and actually would kill the first top 10 hero, Endeavor, who would be working on a case to try to catch a group of villains that have been moving a bunch of quirk enhancement drugs. But once he would arrive, Endeavor would see that there's a bunch of dead people all over the ground with their heads crushed in and just having been slammed into things, a couple of gunshot wounds, and things of that nature, which would have ultimately left to their very gruesome deaths. Now, obviously, Omni-Man would have done this in a way that doesn't look like he's the one responsible, and when Endeavor would walk inside, he'd be like, "Good God, how did this happen?" So he would look for more clues, but he would then be greeted to the side of Omni-Man, asking him if he knows what's going on here, with Omni-Man saying he doesn't plainly, and Endeavor then saying, "Well, could you tell me what the heck happened with that battle between our sons back there? He humiliated the kid. You could have at least taught your son some restraint." As Omni-Man, looking at him with a deadpan look, would say that was restraint. Now let me show you what no restraint looks like. As he would fly towards the direction of Endeavor, who, realizing that he was about to try to kill him, would shoot his flames at the direction of Omni-Man, but he would just tank this before then punching a hole straight through Endeavor's stomach, as Endeavor would fall to both knees and say, "Why?" "Because you're in my way, Endeavor," Omni-Man would say as he would pull his arm out of his stomach, dropping him to the ground, with Endeavor just watching his life flash before his eyes, as Omni-Man in this moment would think nothing of it, flying home, making his way there just in time for dinner, as the family would begin talking about their day. When they would ask Nolan what was going on, he ended up saying that he stopped a couple of villains and that was about it. He would then go silent before eating some of his food and looking at Izuku, wondering when exactly will be the right time to tell him. He would think that it's definitely going to be sometime soon, considering that he's already started killing heroes off, and he has to do it, because if he doesn't, they're gonna stand in his way and be a huge pain in his side. So he needs to convince Izuku to join his side, but this is gonna prove to be a lot more difficult than he had hoped for. Because in this timeline, Deku had the ideals of a hero since he was a little boy. Ever since he could remember, that's the kind of person he's been. And Omni-Man has been literally training him in the opposite ideals that he really believes in, having actually started to believe them at some point, but his loyalty to Wolfram just wouldn't allow him to continue living this false life, this facade. As he would pretty much just, watch as Deku would eat his food and make his way up to his room, he would stare at him wondering when he'll finally say something. But we would flash forward in time as we would see all the students back in UA after the events of the UA School Festival, with everybody being told that today they're going to be picking their pro hero names. As we would see the pro hero Midnight walk into the classroom, and you just see a scene of Mineta and Kaminari just being absolute pervs like usual. They would be like, "Oh, she's so much hotter in person," as Kaminari would say, "Oh yeah," throwing a thumbs up. As from this point, she would go on to explain that all pro heroes have some sort of cool name that makes them stand out from the crowd, saying that a cool costume isn't enough, your name has to be heroic as well. So everybody would go up there and start showing off their new pro hero names that they all would have thought of. And interestingly enough, Deku would actually sit there struggling with this, never having given much thought to what his hero name really would have been. In this timeline, his thoughts wouldn't all just be consumed with Almighty Might or Mighty All or mighty, all might, mighty. You know what I mean? Like how in the original, all he wanted to do was name himself after All Might. In this timeline, he kind of thought about something along the lines of Omni Boy or something like that, but he was like, nah, that's lame. And as he was sitting there, you know, tapping his expo marker on his head with his whiteboard, wondering what he's gonna write on there, he would turn to see Kaminari looking at him, wondering what he's struggling with so hard. As Izuku looking at him would say, he's just having a hard time picking a hero name. And he would say, what? Dude, what are you thinking about this so hard for? You're invincible. You're gonna be a cool hero with or without a cool name. As Deku hearing that would go, wait, what did you just say? Kirishima would be like, you're gonna be a great hero. He's like, no, before that. Oh, you're invincible? Deku's like, thanks, man. As he would pretty much write it down and just be like, you're a lifesaver. He goes to the front of the class and then he proceeds to show off his hero name. I'm gonna be the pro hero Invincible, standing up to any threat and making sure that the world is protected. From now on, everyone will know me as the hero Invincible. Everybody in the classroom would start getting hyped up, being like, heck yeah, that's such a sick name. And Kirishima, you know, listening to that would be like, I can't believe I named him. As, you know, he would tell Deku that he's gonna have to trademark that and he's gonna owe him a bit of money every time he uses it. Deku starts laughing, telling him, whatever, dude, as he pushes him a little bit. And, you know, Kirishima would be sent flying a little bit as Deku's like, my bad, I didn't mean to push you that hard. After this would happen, everybody else would go on to get their own hero names, as finally, everybody would begin choosing who they're going to be going on their pro internship with. Now, in this specific timeline, there's no other choice than for Izuku to go with Omni-Man, so he would essentially end up going on a 1-week training trip with his father. And because this isn't exactly something new for Deku, this isn't going to be something that I'm actually going to be covering. They definitely stop villains here and there and go on hero patrols and fly around the world and do combat training and stuff, but apart from that, nothing really interesting happens, I say as I proceed to name off the most interesting things ever. But yeah, no, some of you guys at this point might be wondering what happens in terms of Stain and Ida and his brother. Well, in this timeline, that stuff doesn't even happen, because thanks to Omni-Man being around in the story, when he ended up finding out that there was a guy named the Hero Killer who was going around taking heroes out left and right, normally he would have just let this happen because of the fact that, hey, Hero Killer, he's doing his job for him. But he is a hero, so he has to still masquerade as one. And so, having seen the Hero Killer working at night, he would have ignored him a couple of times, but one time it would be just too much for him to ignore, and he would fly down, absolutely decimating the Hero Killer Stain, who would have tried his best to stand up to him. But come on now, it's literally Omni-Man. His blades weren't even going to be piercing through his skin, so there's no way he was going to do anything. So he actually gets stopped before he can even hurt Ida's death, which means that in this timeline, Ida doesn't even go train with the manual, instead opting to go train with his older brother, what's his name? The engine hero, I don't know, I forgot. The engine hero, whatever, right? As they train together, and in this timeline, they don't have to deal with the loss of Ida or death or anything like that, which actually usually happens in my videos, and they're all able to just return back to class, where all of them going back would end up having a little bit of a hero race to assess what they would have learned during this time. Now, everybody else, you know, they get their little usual impressive scores or whatever, but Deku blows the competition out of the water, destroying anybody else's score and rescuing All Might in a time kind of similar to what his girlfriend would have got. Kendo in this timeline would be a very impressive hero, and she would actually be among the top heroes in the class, which is why I think her powers are super sick. That's just me. But yeah, she would perform very well. She kind of gives me Nejire vibes, but better. Do you get what I mean? So yeah. After everybody would complete the rescue training race, Aizawa would walk inside with his nonchalant voice saying, alright, well, after assessing your skills and you guys have doing this, you guys have gotten a lot better. But at the end of the day, we're approaching your final, so you're going to have to show us everything you've got. Make sure to work hard and go plus ultra. As he would walk away and everybody would be like, crap, the finals, I didn't study. Deku would be among those few people because he has honestly been falling behind in his studies thanks to focusing a lot more on his newfound powers and training with his dad and all the things that have been happening with him and Kendo lately. Interestingly enough, Kendo would actually look at him and be like, knock it off. You know I'm gonna help you study. And Izuku would go over to her as he kisses her in the middle of the class and is like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everybody just stares at them as they're like, public display of affection much? As Deku's like, oh, right, my bad. and we would pretty much end up getting a scene of them making their way home as they would start studying together every day for the following week until the final exams would finally come around. Obviously, I'm not going to bore you guys with the details of the written exam, but Deku passes, safe to say, and then he would be paired up with his worst enemy, or, the person that he least likes in the class, Bakugo. Now, we all know Bakugo, being the character he is, would be absolutely opposed to working with Deku, and I could see him just rushing in there blindly, trying to fight off against All Might, trying to see if he can prove himself and show that he's not weak. But unfortunately, All Might proceeds to beat the man into a pulp, slamming gates on top of him to the point where he can't even move anymore, and then knocking him out with the one good punch to the dome. As Izuku would watch this, he would think, "Never change, Bakugo, always stay the same and stay behind," as he would pretty much look towards the direction of All Might, asking him if he's ready. All Might would stare at Izuku as he would say, "Young man, are you?" As Izuku would go flying in towards the direction of All Might, and their fists would clash, creating a sonic boom, which would destroy a bunch of windows in the area, and Izuku would smile at the direction of All Might, with him doing the same, before Izuku would spin 180 degrees and throw a back kick towards the direction of All Might's stomach, actually hitting him in his other side of his weak spot, because I don't want to kill the guy, as he would send him flying through multiple buildings, with Izuku just kind of standing there waiting for All Might to come back out, thinking, "I've always wanted to do that." And so they would begin a 1v1 battle, as Izuku would have to hold back drastically, but he would actually still end up getting a great fight from All Might, with All Might pushing him a bit and actually landing a couple blows that draw some blood from him. After this would happen, Izuku would finally throw one more punch towards the direction of All Might, which All Might would attempt to catch, but this time it would be 100% of his power, almost, as he would punch through his hand, his guard, and then send it crashing into his face, so it would look like All Might's the one hitting himself. He would go flying, as Deku would say, "It's been fun, All Might," as he would fly away through the gates, and Izuku and Bakugo would be declared the winners of this event. After this would happen, All Might would simply watch on as Deku would fly off, thinking that the next generation really is in good hands. And all the while this would be happening, another pro hero by the name of Mirko would be getting killed while Deku was taking his final exams. Omni-Man would have presently have killed a bunch of heroes, 20 and counting, and he would be currently making his way towards one of the raids that Mirko was currently on. At the moment, she was gonna go stop an underground fighting facility where a bunch of people with quirks can go down there and fight against each other to the death. She would arrive with a squadron of a bunch of sidekick heroes, as they would all capture everybody, and after the operation would be done, you would just see Mirko going, "All these guys were absolute weaklings, I was hoping for a bit of a fight," as Omni-Man comes flying in, punching her square in the skull, sending her crashing into one of the beams that's supporting the area, as it would collapse, crushing Mirko under all the rubble. As Omni-Man would say, "Guess I could say the same." He would then see as all the little sidekick heroes would look at his direction, and he would simply smile, as they would be like, "No way, it's Omni-Man." Some of them would begin crying, being like, "No, no," but they would just die, having their heads ripped off, or having, different killing methods performed. Some of them would be cut in half, some of them right down the middle, some of them he would just stab his fingers into their eyes and poke their brains. It really depended on how he felt like killing them. And the quickness of their death all depended on how much they fought back, considering that they weren't going to be leaving this area alive. But regardless of this, Omni-Man, just like usual, would fly home, but at this point suspicions would finally begin to arise on the fact that it could be somebody like Omni-Man. Seeing as not too many people are alive in the world that are capable of performing stuff like this at such a rapid rate, there's no way that this could be a different person, and the dots are just starting to connect way too well. Omni-Man knows that he only has a couple more heroes to kill before they finally hone in on him, but he wouldn't be worried knowing that even if they did, they couldn't do a thing against him. Plus, he was counting on them trying to fight back. So he would make his way home, having dinner with his family just like he would in the original, as on the TV would come news coverage that the pro hero, the rabbit hero, Mirko, would be dead. Deku, seeing this, would be like, "Dad, it's crazy. There's been an uprising of hero deaths lately. Do you know who could have caused that?" Omni-Man would start saying that he's not really too sure and that there's been a villain out on the loose who's doing this, but telling Izuku not to worry, that when he encounters him, he'll be sure to kill him. rip him to shreds for him. Izuku hearing this would be like, what do you mean kill him? As Omni-Man would say, I'm kidding, I meant put him in jail, with him realizing that his language slipped out a bit, him being the one that taught Izuku never to kill people unless absolutely necessary. That said, Deku would begin to speak to them about the fact that they're going to be going to Island soon on a bit of a field trip, saying that All Might personally had invited him out to go to this hero expo where they're going to be showing the latest technology and a bunch of heroes are going to be there. Omni-Man listening into this conversation would perk up as he would ask Izuku who exactly he knows is going to be there. He would go on to tell him that a couple of his classmates are going, but most importantly, a couple top 10 heroes, All Might and stuff like that are going to be present. Omni-Man hearing this would get an extremely serious face expression as he would realize that this is his perfect opportunity to strike at the heroes, and so he would end up deciding to go to the island and kill the symbol of peace, All Might. Him thinking about this would begin to wonder how exactly he's going to do this, considering that Izuku's presence there is going to make things a bit difficult. But the perfect cover-up would come when he would find out about the operation that Wolfram and the original villains of this arc would have been running. He would simply end up having to kill one of their men as he would take his place, putting on his armor which has a helmet on it so nobody was able to see who he was. And with that being the case, as Izuku would land down on the island, touching down, he would end up walking towards the direction of, a small girl with blonde hair, as Izuku seeing her would wonder who exactly she is. All Might saying that this is his niece, Melissa Shield, that she's the daughter of David Shield. Izuku hearing this would be like, oh, it's nice to meet you. And he would begin shaking her hand as, they begin talking for a little bit, and Deku would ultimately be shown around by Melissa Shield the entire island. After this would happen, we would get a scene of him meeting David Shield, and unlike in the original, he wouldn't begin freaking out being like, oh, it's David Shield. Nah, he just respects the man greatly and would pretty much just be waiting for his girlfriend Kendo to arrive to the island, knowing that she's coming via the luck of the draw because some students from UA were invited. That said, he would end up meeting up with Kendo and introducing Melissa to her, and they would have a bit of a conversation with her being like, so you spent all this time alone with her, did ya? Izuku being like, it's not like that, as he would look at her and tell her that the only girl for him is her. She would smile and say, yeah, whatever, as he would show her the island, but all the while that they would be there, she'd be like, oh, did she show you this place? As Izuku would start to get annoyed by her, constant teasing of him and making jokes at the expense of, oh, he cheated on her, you know what I mean? Izuku getting really annoyed to be like, alright, that's it, you gotta stop cracking these jokes. What, you want me to show you a different part of the world and show you around there instead? We're on an island for crying out loud. As she would say, alright, stop being so mad, I'm just yanking your chain. I didn't know you were only invincible against physical attacks. Thought maybe you'd have a better tolerance towards jokes. As Izuku would get kind of upset and they would continue their little date or whatever it is you want to call it, and the day would be honestly perfect. Everything would be going awesome and he's texting his mom saying that things are going perfect on his side. Eventually nighttime would come around and Deku would put on his suit. This time he's not going to be wearing that ugly burgundy / red / whatever the heck that color was. He's instead going to be using the classic black suit. As making his way towards the spot that they were all agreeing to meet up on, he would end up shooting a text towards his girlfriend Kendo asking where she was at, as he would then hear from behind him, look, turn around, and he would turn to see his girlfriend looking absolutely stunning. Deku seeing this would have a huge grin on his face, as he would then proceed to take her by the hand and ask her if he could have this dance in a kind of a cringy fashion, but in a lovable way. As she would say, of course, taking his hand as the both of them would make their way towards the main area where all the heroes were at. But all too suddenly, every single door would shut in on them as all the students from UA would all be stuck in the same room. They would all wonder what's going on, and it'd be at this point that Tsuyu would be like, I don't know, maybe they started a lockdown, ribbit, as, we pretty much end up having all the heroes looking towards the direction of one of the tunnels that's there, and Izuku breaking through it would begin to fly through there, going to scour what's going on. Everybody else would follow behind, and they would all end up realizing that they're in the middle of a villain attack. Deku, noticing this, would look down onto the crowd of people, as there would be a ton of robots that are currently holding people hostage, as well as stooges or goons that the villain is using. That said, Deku would want to go down there, but Kendo would grab his arm saying that if he does, people are gonna die. As Izuku, seeing that All Might's one of the people captured, All Might would notice them up on the roof via the ventilation system, and he would nod at them, telling them to get out of there or try to stop this or whatever it is that he's thinking. And as Deku's watching this, they'd be having like a little bit of a conversation. Omni-Man, inside of his outfit so no one could tell who he was, would look up towards the vent, seeing Izuku. As knowing that he was watching, he would proceed to walk towards the direction of All Might and ask him what he thinks he's doing. As he would punch All Might, sending him crashing through the room, landing on some rubble, with All Might just simply taking the beating. Omni-Man from this point, with the disguise, or Evil Man, we're gonna call him that for this present time, Evil Man would go over towards him and would actually stomp on his head, with All Might being like, "Ah, villain, why are you doing this?" And Omni-Man would say, "Because he can." As All Might would be watching, watching this man just take advantage of his power, Izuku would be watching all this as his fists would begin clenching tighter and tighter, and he just wants to go down there and help. But ultimately, he wouldn't, with Kendo telling him that they need to save everybody, but they need to be smart about this. They would leave the area, and once Omni-Man was sure that Deku wasn't watching, he would proceed to just kill All Might on the spot, saying that this was to make him an example out of everybody. And people got absolutely terrified that somebody was capable of punching a hole straight through All Might's heart and killing him that way. That shouldn't be possible, right? People would think, and you would just hear the iconic screams coming from the girls that were nearby as, Omni-Man's doing his thing, and he's writing names and he's taking him out. After this would happen, he would turn his attention towards the heroes that were actually there, and he would proceed to kill each and every single one of them, as screams would be heard from that area, and all the civilians would watch on as Evil Man, which is what we're naming him now, would just go on and kill every single person there, with nobody knowing that that was Omni-Man. I mean, for all they knew, that was really just a goon with an extremely powerful quirk. He wasn't flying or using any of Omni-Man's iconic abilities, actually moving in a bit of a different way than what Izuku would be used to. But ultimately, Izuku, being unaware of this with the rest of Class 1A, would finally end up making their way to the room where they would turn off the controls and all the security systems. As they would successfully do so, and Deku would then be ran up on by a guy with a blade quirk who would attempt to kill him, but Deku, being who he is, would quickly punch him, knocking him out, as Wolfram would finally make his presence known, using his quirk enhancement device he got from David's shield, would proceed to shoot a ton of metal towards the direction of Izuku, which Deku would easily dodge. And all the while this would be happening, you would see the same lackey that would have killed All Might get closer to Wolfram, telling him that the job's finished, sir. As Wolfram would hear that, he would say, "Excellent, well, let's go." As they would pretty much make their way towards the roof, and Izuku, seeing the man walk closely, he would realize that this dude is making him feel scared, a level of fear that he's only ever felt once before when he was sparring against his dad and he accidentally took things too far. Izuku, realizing this, would see the size of this man and his proportions, and he would think, there's no way. But all too suddenly, as he and Wolfram would walk away, he would pierce his hand through his heart, crushing it, as Wolfram would be like, "How did you?" But he would just fall down to the ground dead, as Omni-Man would crush the quirk enhancement device by his foot. He would then burst through the window, just jumping out of it, landing on the ground just perfectly fine, before running away, and he would suddenly hear a sonic boom go off in the distance. Deku, seeing that, would realize that that had to be his dad, but part of him just couldn't believe it. Deku at this point would just be seen looking outside the window as Kendo walks over to him and asks him if he's okay. He would look at her with fear in his eyes as she would say, "What's wrong?" And Izuku would be like, "Nothing, I was just scared for everybody down there. Let's go check on them." And once he would arrive down below, he would see that All Might was dead, along with 30 plus heroes and every single other lackey that was present in that room with the hostages. That said, this would practically confirm Deku's suspicions, as he wouldn't be sure why this is the case, but at this point he would feel more than 80% sure that his father was responsible for every single one of their deaths at this point. As after this event would happen and cleanup would finally take place, Deku would actively start distancing himself from his father, with this incident definitely causing a massive, scale event going out, with people having a huge funeral for All Might, similar to what they would have held in Invincible for the Guardians of the Globe. Yep, I rewatched the series a little bit. I watched like 3 more episodes last night, finished season 1, pretty proud to say that, but yeah, I'm on season 2, episode 1 at this moment, so yeah, it's pretty cool so far. Anyways, point is, they would be holding this massive funeral for All Might, and eventually Omni-Man would go forth as he would give a speech saying that All Might was bigger than life. All Might was the symbol of peace, a true hero to look up with, someone with integrity, someone who would jump in and save people without a second thought, someone that he once called a friend. He would then walk away from the mic as people would begin clapping and people would say, we love you, All Might, and you would just hear, people going crazy over the funeral, with Deku watching his father wondering why he did it, if he even meant half of those things. But Omni-Man, looking towards the direction of Deku, would look at him a little strangely, wondering why he's staring at him like that, but Deku would simply smile, with Omni-Man chalking it up to him being thrown off by the death of his teacher. He walks over towards him and puts his hand on him, saying that he understands that he's saddened to lose a teacher and a great hero like All Might, telling him that things will get better, that whoever that was, they're gonna catch him. Also going on to say that he suspects that whoever that was probably responsible for the deaths of the rest of the heroes, telling him not to worry, that he's gonna handle it. As Izuku, looking at his father, would nod his head, trying to act okay, but at this point Omni-Man would realize that his son is most definitely off, wanting to tell him in this moment, but at this point Izuku would hear a ring from his phone, as it would be his girlfriend Kendo asking how the funeral's going. Omni-Man, seeing this, would walk away, not wanting to even have that conversation yet, as Deku would begin speaking to her, telling her that yeah, it's just a funeral, not exactly a fun time. She would go on to say that she bets, asking how he's holding up, as Izuku would say, well, I'm holding up about as good as I can, pretty much telling her that he's definitely going to be needing to go on a recovery date, with her laughing and saying that she's more than down for that. That being said, some time would pass after the news of All Might's death would go public, and the forest training camp event would still end up happening. So everybody would get on top of a bus, making their way towards a strange forest where they would see their camping base miles away. But realizing this, the students would be like, wait, no, you guys aren't, but it'd be too late. They would instantly begin having to face off against Pixie Bob's monster creations, and all of them would just run through them, having Deku there, and the fact that Kendo's there, and a stronger Bakugo there. It's just a walk in the park. They absolutely solo this entire training exercise, and this is nothing for Deku, so they just go through it, and honestly, Deku could have cleared all the monsters and they would have been fine. But that said, they end up making their way towards the camp, and they would actually end up having an incredible 5 days where all of them would train together, work on their quirks, make new memories, go into bath springs, and etc. You get the point. Deku during this time would have actually even started to forget everything that was worrying him, having spent some incredible days next to some friends of his as well as his girlfriend. But that would all end when suddenly a huge blue forest fire would emerge, and Deku, knowing that that's not flames produced by normal, wilderness, Deku would fly up into the air as he would begin looking around to see where his classmates are, seeing as they were about to do an event where all of them were in the forest. Deku, in the air, would notice that Koda's not there, as he would fly off looking for him and very quickly find him. Deku would land on the ground as he would see Muscular standing right next to Koda, with Koda shaking with fear, trying to use his quirk against Muscular to keep him to stay back, but Muscular was inching closer and closer, and Deku would fly in, going, "Stay away from him!" punching Muscular square in the chest, sending him crashing into the mountain, as Deku, looking towards Koda, would ask him if he's okay. Koda would nod yes, as Deku would tell him to run away, that he's not gonna want to see this, and Muscular, getting out of the rubble, would go on to punch Deku square in the face, sending him away, as he would say, "You're right, kid, you don't want to watch this." But you will. You're gonna watch me tear this hero limb from limb. As Deku, getting angry at the fact that he was willing to actually kill this kid, would fly in and punch Muscular over and over and over, who would cover himself with his muscle fibers and throw a couple of punches towards Deku's direction. Now, normally I'd say that Deku could just one-shot him, but we've seen Mark Grayson literally go up against characters much weaker than him, and still, for some reason, let them get their, 1-2 punches in on him and, draw a little blood from him. So I could see the battle going in that direction, where he eventually picks Muscular up and slams him into a mountainside before punching him over and over and over and over in the face, leading Muscular to be knocked out, as Deku, with blood on his gloves, would pretty much end up telling Kota to hop on his back, giving him a flight piggyback ride, taking him directly towards Aizawa, as he would go on to tell him that he's gonna go find more students. From this point, Aizawa would say, "Wait," as Deku would go off, and he would end up flying towards the direction of Kendo, knowing that she was out there trying to save as many people as she could. And currently, she would actually be fighting Dabi, who would be giving her a lot of trouble with his flame quirk, making it very hard for her to get close, and we would get a fight kind of similar to the one that we get between Invincible and Adam Eve versus that gravity power, or like the shockwave earthquake guy. That's kind of what happens, but obviously now he doesn't create shockwaves, he creates fire from his hands that he shoots out. Obviously the battle's much easier than whoever that guy was, and Deku and she, through teamwork and combined attacks, would easily proceed to defeat Dabi, with Dabi, standing on his last legs, being pushed back and shooting the highest outputage of flames that he possibly could at Deku's direction. But Deku would simply fly through it as it would begin burning his costume a little bit, leaving a little bit of a char-like effect, as he would fly straight through the flames, punching Dabi square in the face, sending him crashing into a tree, as Dabi hitting the tree with a thud would suddenly disappear, with Izuku swearing that he saw a man with a mask looking like he had a top hat on as well. He would chalk that up to his imagination, as out of nowhere they would begin hearing screams as the two of them nodded each other and would fly off towards the direction of Ochako and Tsuyu, who would both be in the middle of facing off against Toga, who was currently pushing the both of them back. Izuku coming flying in would easily end up, saving Araraka from getting hit, as Kendo would trap Toga inside of a prison that she would create with her pink little atom quirk or whatever it is that she has, as, Toga would not be able to get out of this, and we would then see them eventually meeting up with the rest of the hero students, such as Bakugo and Todoroki, as well as Tokiyami and Duple Arms. With them all finding each other, they would rush through the forest wondering what exactly is happening and why these villains are foolish enough to attack the school when they know that the son of Omni-Man's here, for crying out loud. Deku, hearing this, would say he doesn't know, but whoever they are, they're stupid. Bakugo would go to chip in, but before he could say anything, he would be turned into a marble by Mr. Compress, who would rush away from their direction faster than they could notice, as by the time that they would all do so, Mr. Compress would already be by the portal, as Deku would fly towards the direction of them, realizing that both Tokiyami and Bakugo were dead. He would go flying in screaming, "You're dead!" as he would barely miss the portal by a couple of seconds, and he would land on the ground, smashing his fist into the ground, creating a crater, as he would say, "Damn it!" He would begin to feel a lot of emotions going through his head right now, as he would feel that he let them down. Though he doesn't particularly like Bakugo, he has to admit that he didn't want him to be taken by the villains. But while Deku was pretty much sitting there self-sulking, Kendo would go over to him saying it's okay, he tried his best. Deku would look at her and take her by the hand as she would help him up, and he would say, "You're right, we'll find them. Bakugo's not going to kick the bucket so easily, and neither will Tokiyami. They're both powerful." As Kendo would say, "Exactly, just think about the positives for now." Deku at this point would nod, as he would look at her direction, telling her that she's right, and that he's so glad that she's here, saying something along the lines of, "I don't know what I'd do without you." As Omni-Man, who would have been watching that entire display all along, would get angry. You would hear a sonic boom in the air, as Deku, looking up into the sky, would say, "Dad?" But Omni-Man at this point would be long gone, having witnessed that attack entirely, as he was just about to tell his son the truth about himself and his planet. But it looks like now, things are gonna have to wait a little longer. Omni-Man would fly straight to the direction of Omni-Man's base, as he would arrive there in about 2 minutes, with All For One expecting his arrival and saying that he's glad he could make his acquaintance once more. Omni-Man staring at him though would have none of the same energy, as he would stare at him, telling him that he had thought he made himself clear, that the next time that he attacked his his student's class in an attempt to make a power play, he would kill him. As All For One would go on to explain that he doesn't have to listen to him anymore, because now he has a quirk that's sure to kill him. And by implementing it and combining it with another ability of his, he's going to be able to one-shot Omni-Man. He would stare at the direction of All For One as he would tell him that Earth is not his to conquer. He would fly towards the direction of All For One, and All For One with a huge grin would aim one hand out, combining a quirk that pretty much allows him to shoot projectiles with Rewind, a quirk that he would have actually ended up stealing from Overhaul and Airy, since, you know, he would have been in negotiations to try to get them to come to his side, but ultimately things fell through. And when he found out about the quirk Rewind, he knew that was his ticket out. So, aiming this projectile towards the direction of Omni-Man, he would hit him as he would rewind him 100 years, smirking, thinking that this is going to turn him to dust, to nothingness. But the second that it would hit, it would literally barely do anything, because Viltrumites live for thousands of years, I think, right? I'm not too sure. But the point is, after it would hit him, it would literally just age him down, as his punch would come flying in towards the direction of All For One, and he would destroy his mask, punching his head clean off his body. He would then begin to close and open his hand as he would grip it, and he would say that he feels stronger, saying that All For One was a fool for trying to rewind him back in time, saying that Viltrumites, unlike humans, aren't tethered to these small lifespans, and that he really just did him a favor. He would think, though, that was a smart tactic. If his powers really were driven by quirks, and he was a human, it would have worked, but he's a Viltrumite. He would fly off as he would leave the dead body of All For One there and make his way towards the direction of his house. Nolan would shower and clean off his suit, beginning to practice by himself in the room how he was going to break the news to Izuku that he's a Viltrumite and that they need to conquer this planet and induct it into their program of other, planets that they have. Izuku, making his way home would finally open the door, as Omni-Man would be there waiting to talk to his son about everything, but he would enter the house with Kendo by his side. And Omni-Man, seeing this, would actually sigh as he would say, "Oh, you're home early and with your girlfriend." Izuku would look at his dad as he would say, "Yeah, Dad, I'm here early." He would then go on to tell him to have fun up there and not to get in trouble, as Izuku would say, "We will, Dad," and Kendo would say, "Nice to see you again, Mr. Nolan," or whatever it is that she calls him, as, Izuku, making his way up to, his room with her, would just kind of sit there as he would have a bit of an awkward air in the area, and she would question why this is. Deku would say that he can't talk about it, but then he would hear his father flying off in the distance as the iconic sonic boom would sound, and Izuku, knowing that now he has at least a little bit of time to tell her before he comes back, would actually begin to fill her in on everything that he's been suspecting. Deku would say, "Remember Island when we saw that person who was able to kill All Might as well as defeat that villain Wolfram? I think that was my father in disguise." She would say, "What? There's no way. Omni-Man would never do something like that." But Izuku would say, "That's just it. He wouldn't. But did you notice the build of that person? He was about as tall as my dad, and the musculature, it doesn't lie. How many people do you know that are built like that, with that size?" As she would say, "Not many." From this point, he would also go on to explain that there's also not many people who would be capable of punching straight through All Might, saying that when he punched him, it took a lot just to deal damage, never mind the fact that it would take way more force to completely pierce through his skin. At this point, she would begin to actually be like, "You're right. How many people other than Omni-Man would be capable of killing him? Plus that villain, he died instantly. It took him no effort." But that doesn't explain the fact that he wasn't flying. He didn't have super speed. Maybe he just had a super strength quirk or something like that. The super strength quirk could be the reason that he's built so strong, and maybe he's just, as tall as your dad. Deku would say, "I've considered those things, Kendo, but my dad's been off lately. I don't know what it is, but I just can't help but feel like he's responsible for all of this." Okay, you're right. Okay, maybe now it looks like a bigger possibility, but there could be a reason. Maybe he was under mind control or something and just was too embarrassed to say something. Deku would say, "Maybe. I'm just praying that that's the case. I couldn't imagine having to face off against my dad. He'd probably kill me, but if I have to, I'll do it." She would look at him and say, "Izuku, you..." As you know, as this would happen, they would hear a knock at the door and it would be Inko being like, "Hey Zuku, do you guys want snacks?" Deku would say, "Nah, we're good, mom." And for the following next couple of hours, or no, like for the following hour, they would kind of just sit there and talk about things, think things over, and try to distract themselves by watching a movie or their favorite rom-com or whatever. But that being the case, we would switch over to Omni-Man's perspective to see what he was currently up to, what hero he was hunting down. At this point, Omni-Man would make his way towards America. As arriving there, he would land at a Star and Stripes facility where she and her army guys train, you know, in that season 6 episode, or was it 7? I'm not sure. But he would land there directly in front of everybody with Star and Stripes saying, "I was wondering when you'd come." As the army men nearby would begin shooting towards the direction of Omni-Man, but the bullets would all just ricochet off of him. He would look at them in anger as he would rush towards the direction of Star and Stripes, as she instantly would say, "New order, you're quirkless." As she would expect him to stop instantly, no more flight, no more super speed, and no more super strength. They would begin opening fire on him, and as soon as the smoke would clear, Omni-Man would smirk as he would think to himself that he sure is glad that he lied to everyone about having a quirk. He would fly in towards the direction of Star and Stripes and pierce her straight through the gut, as she'd be like, "How? I took away your..." He would say, "Quirk? I don't have one." At this point, blood would begin pouring out of her mouth as he would pull his hand out of her stomach, and she would say, "New order, you're weak to bullets." As, you know, in this moment, she would then say, "Shoot him." And they would say, "Star, we can't, you're..." And she would say, "Shoot him," you know, like not being able to fully speak well. And they would open fire. But in this moment, Omni-Man would use her body as a human shield, as the bullets would completely destroy her body, and he would drop her to the ground saying, "Now then," cracking his fingers saying, "Let's begin." He would go throughout each and every single one of them as he would kill them mercilessly, similarly to what he would have done against the Guardians of the Globe, before then flying off and making his way to other countries' pro-heroes, some of the most powerful ones, and people who genuinely could give him a bit of a run for his money under the right circumstances, killing at least 17 heroes that were all top 10, like the strongest characters in the entire verse that we don't even know yet of. And then he would fly into the atmosphere as all the blood on his suit would quickly be poured off, and he would make his way towards his house, resolving himself to tell Izuku, I was gonna say Mark, the truth about everything, where he comes from and what they have to do. At this point, it's not a matter of if, but when. He would make his way home, and once he would end up entering the house, he would end up making his way towards Deku's room, but Deku would have been on his way to go get some water because Kendo would have said she was thirsty. Deku would then be bumping into his father as he would say, "Hey dad, what's up?" And he would say, "Put your suit on, we need to talk." At this point, he would grab his suit, putting it on, as he would tell Kendo that he'll be back. He's gonna go have a talk with his father. She would be worried, saying, "Are you sure?" And he would say, "Yeah, he wouldn't do anything to me." As Izuku and his father would fly off into the atmosphere, and he would say, "Look, it's time you knew the truth." Beginning to explain that yes, he is from the planet Viltrum, and he was honest about that, but he didn't tell him the full story. He would then go on to explain the truth about his people, saying that in order to come from the kind of planet that he's from, it took a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of lives were lost, explaining the process of elimination of the weak from the Viltrumites and how they essentially colonize, okay, you guys know what word I'm looking for. Other planets. He would begin to explain to Izuku that this is the Viltrum way, and now he needs to do the same to Earth. Deku hearing this would go, "No, what do you mean you need to do the same to Earth? You don't need to do a thing, Dad. You taught me that in this world, there's value in protecting people. You showed me how to be a hero, and now you're asking me to enslave my people?" Izuku, these are not your people. Viltrumite DNA is so dense that you might as well be full Viltrumite. You and I have a duty to fulfill to our people Viltrum, and if you're not gonna help me, then you stand against me. Deku looking at him would say, "Ow, how am I supposed to turn my back on my friends, my girlfriend, Mom? What about Mom? How do you think she feels about this?" He would say, "Your mom won't be happy to find out about this, but it's something that had to happen." Izuku hearing this would realize that his dad is dead serious, and his hands would drop to the ground as he would look at his father and say, I I won't. I'm not gonna kill my people. Omni-Man turning to him would say, you don't know what you're saying. And Izuku would say, I know exactly what I'm saying, throwing a punch towards the direction of his dad, but he would catch it with one hand, telling him that if that's how he wants things, then fine, punching Deku square in the face, sending him flying kilometers away, as he would begin beating the brakes off of Deku left and right, landing punch after punch after punch, swinging him by his leg and catapulting him into the ground, as he would land with a thud, and he would then proceed to grab him by his costume and drag him through the ground. He would start to pretty much destroy his costume and leave him in ruin, as Deku, feeling all this pain from his dad, would try to combat against this, being a lot stronger than the mark that actually would have gone against his father in the original. Deku would be like, get off me, as he would push his father off of him and throw a punch square at his face. It would actually turn him and cause a little bit of blood to come out, as he would say, please, you call that a punch? He would deliver a thunderous blow to the face of Deku, as he would be sent flying through a skyscraper, killing tons of people. Deku, seeing that, would say, Dad, you just killed them all. And he would say, so what? These people's lives are meaningless to me. They're here today and gone tomorrow. Their lives are as valuable to me as a dog. Deku, hearing this, would say, but you saved so many of them. You defeated so many villains. You've never killed anybody. How could you? He would say, I've killed hundreds of people. There's so many villains that you don't know of that I've slaughtered and killed, and adding them to the toll count won't be keeping me up at night. He would then punch Deku straight through a bus of people, as all those people would die and an explosion would be heard. He would proceed to beat him throughout the entire city of Japan, as Deku would proceed to get pummeled by his father, destroying him in hand-to-hand combat, showing the true difference between their powers, that they could not be more different from each other. And Deku would try to fight back, believe me, he would, but he just can't stand up to his father. Maybe he'll land a couple good blows here and there, but it's just gonna serve to piss him off more. And with Deku trying to save people's lives, Omni-Man would essentially decide that he's done playing nice guy, grabbing Deku and using his own body to actually use it as a baseball bat, killing hundreds of people, throwing him through tons of buildings and making his way to the train station, and using his body to essentially hold him up as a shield as all these humans would come flying at him, and he would kill a bus full of people, a train station, a block of a city. Like, bro, the death count would be just absolutely ludicrous. And as Izuku begins to be covered in blood, he would still try to fight back, trying to grab at his father's face, saying, stop it, but he just wouldn't be able to do a thing. Ultimately, he would throw him across the world, as he would land on Mount Everest, and he would create a gigantic amount of snow to begin pouring down on the people living nearby. At this point, he would see Deku's body begin to be sunken into the snow, as he would drag him out, leaving him on the ground, saying, had enough yet? With Izuku saying, I'll stop you, and Omni-Man saying, I'm ready when you are, as he would slam him onto the ground and begin punching him, saying, why are you resisting? You're doing this for nothing. Being a part of the Empire will make these people be part of something greater. We'll make Earth better than it ever was. You really want to die for this planet? Fine! Punching Mark in the face, Izuku, as he would punch him again and again and again, saying, what's another 17 more years? I could always make another. Telling Izuku that basically he means nothing to him. But as the blows continue landing, they just get weaker and weaker. His resolve was crumbling, staring at Izuku on the ground, who he was currently massacring, and just seeing a version of him when he was a little boy. He just didn't have it in him to absolutely kill his son in this moment. And from the depths of his heart, he would say, why did you make me do this? You're fighting so you could watch everyone around you die. Think, Izuku, think. You'll outlast every fragile, insignificant being on this planet. You'll live to see the world crumble to dust and blow away. Everyone and everything you know will be gone. What will you have after 500 years? You, Dad. I'll have you. As Omni-Man, hearing that, just wouldn't be able to finish what he started. flying off into space, as Izuku's body would then be taken away by medics who would go on to heal him over the course of the next couple of weeks. Deku would miss so much time off in school, and unlike in the original timeline where Mark and Omni-Man's fight was actually captured by the cool little drones or whatever, that would not happen. But the battle that they would have had through Japan definitely would have, and the world would be at a standstill wondering what became of Invincible, Omni-Man's son, wondering whether he survived or he died. All the while we would zoom in onto Kendo right next to Izuku's bed crying, as she would see how weak he looks and would actually think that he was gonna die. But luckily for Izuku, he would pull through and manage to live up to his name, Invincible. At this point, Deku would weekly stand up as he would now be on crutches, and for the following 2 weeks he would pretty much recover all the way back to his normal state. After this would be the case, he would have to publicly go out and give a statement as to what happened, and Izuku, sadly enough, would have to tell the entire truth of the incident between himself and his father. Izuku would start to get a lot of flag on the media, with people saying that he's not a real hero, that a real hero doesn't fight like that, and would have stood up to him better. But people all over the media would defend him, saying that he was fighting off against Omni-Man, and all the destruction and devastation that was caused wasn't even his fault. How was he supposed to avoid getting ragdolled by somebody that strong? He's the strongest person in the universe, they bet. And Izuku just started training. Give the kid some slack, people would say. He's still in UA. But others would say that it was unprofessional and he should have saved more lives, and that thanks to him and his dad's little scuffle, for whatever the reason was, now thousands upon thousands of people are dead. And safe to say, this would definitely heavily weigh on his conscience, being something that he thinks about regularly. But as time would pass, it would come to find out that Omni-Man just wouldn't return. His house would feel empty, and when he would walk inside with his mom, there'd be so many tears because Izuku wouldn't have the strength to tell her the truth about everything. And yes, he still would have ended up saying she's like a pet to me in this version. So Izuku would kind of keep that a secret from her and just say that it was his mission, that he had to do it. And Inko would cry every single day knowing that her husband, the man she had trusted her whole life, was gone. He was a villain the entire time, masquerading as a hero. And with that being the case, Deku would return back to UA as he would complete his classes, and with the threat of overhaul being nullified, that would not be something that we're gonna have to cover. The League of Villains, don't even get me started on them. Deku could one-shot each and every single one of them as if they were nothing but a mere villain of the week. So every threat in the My Hero Academia story would finally be taken care of, and Izuku would go on to live out the rest of his days as the #1 hero in the world, training for the day that Omni-Man ever returned. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we're going to be ending What If Deku Was Invincible. I know a lot of you guys have been requesting this video for a long time, so you're welcome, okay? You're welcome. And honestly, I had an absolute blast making this. I know I said that in the beginning of the video, but I just can't stress enough how fun it was to actually write this story. I know I probably didn't nail the character of Invincible 100%, but I loved watching season 1, and I think I was able to, at bare minimum, translate at least some of the small knowledge that I had from that and put it into this video, and had a lot of fun doing it. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, leave a like on the video, because come on now, bro, you made it this far. The least you could do for me entertaining you for 2 hours is leave a little like on the video. That's gonna go a long way in helping this video do so much better in the algorithm and getting it to so many more people who have never even heard of the concept of a what if video. That said, ladies and gentlemen, I love each and every single one of you guys. Shout out to Popeye's biscuits are not dry, and I'm out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever.